Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Anisha Yadav, and I lead the North America Customer Success team at Revinate. Today, I'm honored to introduce Sherri Kimes, a globally recognized revenue management expert from hospitality. And today, we will be looking at the results from Sherri's latest survey on how hoteliers are responding to COVID-19. With over 900 respondents from across the globe and over 90 countries, these results are very insightful and some great takeaways for all of us in the industry. And with that, I will hand off to Sherri to talk us through these results.
And thank you, Anisha. And as you said, it was pretty amazing with the number of respondents that we had from all over. And what I found particularly interesting with it was how the responses, they were so similar but so different by part of the world. And you could also kind of see how responses varied based on when people were kind of affected by it. But we were kind of looking at what people had done, and then also the most important part is advice for others who are going through this. First, we're going to talk about the survey and then some of the tactics that people are deploying, some other issues like refund policy and such, planning for the future, open-ended questions, and then also kind of advice for moving forward. And so with the survey, as I said, we had over 900 respondents, so 944 at last count from 89 different countries. And about 44% were from the Americas, and about, basically about 23% from Asia Pacific, and then the rest from Europe, Africa, Middle East. And, as we talked about before, people noticed this at different times when the impact of coronavirus was first noticed. Asia Pacific was a little bit earlier, but you can see here, Europe, Africa, Middle East. I mean, the big time when everybody was hit was kind of mid-February through mid-March. And in the Americas, the first time most people noticed it was during March. So obviously, some people noticed it earlier. And why do I bring this up? Well, one is to show how it moved across the world. And also, I think we'll see this with some of the things that people tried to deal with this, because those who've had been dealing with it longer have some different approaches. And so the tactics we're going to be talking about are marketing ones, so sales and marketing, operations, and then also cost cutting. And so with this one, let's just take a look at this. There's some very interesting regional differences. And so we looked at community service and then special rates for certain market segments, quarantine types of hotels, staycations, vouchers, new market segments, and then the category of other. And there's some real differences here. So you can see here with community service, in the Americas and Asia Pacific, significantly more likely to have done that. But all of the other ones, so the special rates, the quarantine hotels, the staycations, and so forth, significantly more respondents from Asia Pacific had done this at their hotels than people in other parts of the world. So the question, one to leave you with is, so why? Some of this might have to do with the fact that they were affected earlier. It also might have something to do with having had to deal with SARS and other disruptions, though nothing nearly as severe as this in the past, but something to just kind of think about. One of the things that was interesting was vouchers. Prepaid vouchers were much more prevalent in Europe, Africa, and Middle East than they were in other parts of the world. But it seems to be working very well for them. The cost-cutting tactics, so looking at closing facilities, renegotiating contracts, laying people off, reducing hours, cutting management, reducing salaries, and delaying renovations, and then other. These also really varied. A lot of people close some facilities, so closing floors or closing restaurants. You have to at a certain point. But the thing that I found the most interesting was looking at layoffs versus looking at versus reducing salaries. And so in the Americas, much more likely to have laid people off or cut management, whereas in Asia Pacific, it was more likely to have reduced salaries. Kind of interesting when you look at this. And some of it has to do with societal pressures, but you're very, very different sorts of approaches. Though some of them, like delaying renovations and renegotiating contracts, pretty similar. The operations tactics deployed, this one was also really interesting. So redeploying employees, what I mean by this is ways of creatively using them in other places. So whether it be at helping out in healthcare or helping out in pharmaceuticals or some area that really needs a lot of help, particularly from hospitality related people, much more likely to have happened in Asia Pacific, though it did happen in other parts of the world. Doing maintenance, doing training. This one was also really interesting, significantly more likely in Asia Pacific. I guess you could also say that they hadn't laid all their employees off, so they had them around, and so looked at this as a good time to be training them so that when things started to get better, that they were even better prepared for it. And then some of the other issues that I looked at were the refund policies and then the government subsidies. And with the refund policies, there's been a lot in the press about this. And in terms of customers were really upset that hotels or airlines were keeping their deposits or there was no refund. And pretty much everybody was giving a full refund. You could see this particularly in the Americas and in Asia Pacific. You were talking about 60-70% of hotels were giving a full refund. Significantly less likely in Europe, Africa, and Middle East, but that what they were doing was giving a credit for a future stay, which is reasonable. And then very, very small percentage were basically saying no refund whatsoever. In my opinion, that's a short-sighted policy because it might help you with cash flow right now, but it'll come back and hurt you later on. And then also with government subsidies, one of the things I asked was, are there government subsidies available? And also, if so, did you apply? And about half of the respondents from the Americas said yes, less likely to have had this available in Asia Pacific, and the most likely to have had it in Europe and Africa and Middle East. I also asked if people had applied if it was available, and pretty much most people had. And planning for the future, because once we at the same time we need to get through this, but we also need to be thinking ahead. So I asked some questions about contingency plans and then thinking about recovery. And contingency plans, this one absolutely shocked me. I asked, well, did you have a contingency plan in place? And it was maybe a third of people, I think it was 35% of the respondents said, well, yes, they did. That's shocking, and no wonder people had a hard time. And so, in Asia Pacific, it was higher, it was 44%, but still less than half. And so one thing that you want to be sure of with this is make sure you have a contingency plan. Obviously, you could not have planned for a pandemic, but have something in place so that when something bad happens, at least you have an idea of the sorts of things that you're supposed to do. And then also asking how long until recovery begins. Respondents in the Americas were a little bit more optimistic than respondents in other parts of the world. But the majority of people, I guess the highest percentage of people were saying 3 to 6 months. And a pretty small percentage of people were saying less than over a year. Now, notice I'm saying here how long until recovery begins. I'm not saying how long until you're fully recovered. That's a completely different sort of thing. So let's talk about the open-ended questions. And there were basically 4 types. So one was reflections on their initial response to the coronavirus situation, things that worked, so good strategies, things that didn't work so well, so things to avoid doing, and then also advice for the future. And so with this is a quick and dirty word cloud, but some of the words that come through here are right on target. Plan, sooner, closed, guest, government, think. You'll see these reflected in the comments that people made. And so the most common comment was that people said they wouldn't make any change in how they responded whatsoever. They thought that they had done the best that they possibly could. Another one that was really said a lot of people were talking about, and people wrote a lot, and so these have been distilled down into the basic themes. They wish they would have acted sooner. because they said they just took too long before they did something about it. And then also kind of looking at the way that they were approaching things from a marketing perspective, and then they couldn't control it. It was either controlled by their chain or by the government. There's nothing that they could really do. And here's that word contingency plan. You'll see that again a little bit. And if you want to get more analysis on this, you can get the full report. And then you're looking at what worked well. Notice here, employees, guests, government, situation, closed again, future. One of the things that people talked about was that the most common one was developing new market segments. And not new market segments in the way that you might normally think about them. We're going to go after this country or something like that. Is that looking at what are some of those customer pain points? So whether it be serving as a quarantine hotel or offering rooms to healthcare workers, or maybe doing staycations or offering basically office away from home. A lot of different things. We'll be compiling those so that you can see those different ideas. Being flexible. People talked about this is not the time to be a hardcore person about refunds and things like that. Understanding that things have changed and customers are worried. So being flexible with them on their future booking plans, and not holding them to all of the same kind of guarantees we might have done before. Communication. This came through loud and clear in terms of communicating with your guests, with your client, with your community, and also with your employees. Things to avoid. Let's see, we say people. It's not to avoid people or employees and guests and situation. Biggest thing, and this is very similar, isn't it, to what people talked about 10 years ago after the financial crisis, try not to drop your rates. This is something that, that's not going to bring more people in right now, and it's something that could lead to a price war. Another thing that people talked about a lot, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, was the need to value your staff and to take care of your staff and to invest in your staff, because they're the future of your organization. And, again, this kind of varied depending on the part of the world. Panic. Trying not to panic, back to rule number 1. And then another interesting one was not doing anything, just pretending. Some people call this the ostrich approach, your head buried in the sand. You can't be doing that. And then advice for the future. And I'm going to make another video in which we go through and talk about these in more depth. Number 1 was plan. As you saw earlier, only 35% of people had a contingency plan. Don't be like that again. Have a plan. People talked about the need to be realistic about this. Things are not going to be the same as they were before. And so what is it going to be, and how are you going to react to it? The importance of having a strong financial reserve. Again, you can't always have this, but this is something people talked about. And then also the need to maintain positivity and to avoid a negative sort of attitude. And so again, I think you'll find the comments very, very useful for you in the future. And so what should you do? I hope that you found this useful. And if you'd like to download the full report, you can go to my website and it will be there. It's at sherrikimes.com. Or if you want to, I'm always here. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you for your time.